Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
First, a word from our sponsor. The Daily Compliance News for May 28, 2022, the Market Manipulation Edition. And we begin with that story from Reuters as it reports that Twitter investors have sued Elon Musk, claiming he manipulated the company's stock price downward before his and during his takeover of alleged or abortive or perhaps takeover of Twitter. The investors say Musk saved himself $156 million by failing to disclose that he purchased 5%, more than 5% of Twitter by March 14, and then conduct by Musk afterwards to try to drive the stock price down further. Of course, this presupposes that Musk will actually buy Twitter, so it can be interesting to see. Next up from Law 360, CCO certifications. And as I previously reported on the Daily Compliance News, the Department of Justice has made this a final rule, and it's now part of the Glencore settlement. But the question is, has the DOJ now initiated, or rather created, an individual liability category, criminal liability category for CCOs who have to certify these? It's certainly a difficult question, and one that's going to weigh on CCOs' minds if you now have to certify in compliance with the DPA when, of course, you don't have the authority to garner resources or run a company like a CEO. So what happens if you make that certification as a CCO and a incident is found, or there's new evidence comes forward, or there's recidivist conduct? All open questions, and all going to be very difficult for CCOs. You would think the DOJ would want CCOs on their side moving forward, but this puts them at serious odds. Next up from Bloomberg, an Apple supplier, a Taiwanese Apple supplier called Quanta, who has a plant in Shanghai, which is complying with government decrees to lock down workers around COVID, is facing a revolt for its workers who've been locked down inside the plant for nearly 2 months. The mostly low-wage workers are demanding more freedom and are beginning to revolt against their overseers. So it's going could be very bad news for Apple, and certainly for their supplier Quanta as well. But it also shows the extreme nature of the Chinese response to the latest strains of COVID and how their initial lockdown policies turned out to be a disaster. And finally, from the Wall Street Journal, Risk and Compliance Journal, Mingy Sun reporting that Glencore said it has completely revamped its compliance programs over the course of its investigations and after the guilty pleas. The company has published a 13-page investor update on its updated compliance program. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.